Well, Mr. Thambo, thanks for your time. Welcome to Update at Noon.
Thanks, Sakina. Greetings to the listeners.
So your reaction to the statement that was released by the finance minister?
Look, I think the first thing we must dispel, because there's a lot of victory laps that are going around, which might mislead South Africans as to what is the objective reality now. So the EFF doesn't seek to burst anyone's bubble, but the reality right now as we speak today, there's no effective reversal of the VAT hike. There's a proposed amendment bill that the Minister of Finance seeks to introduce into the Parliament of South Africa to effect a reversal of the VAT hikes that were introduced and the adjustments to the personal income taxes as well. So that is the first point. So we need to calm down and also read the situation as it is. But the second point as well is that the minister makes a proposal that is going to reverse the submission of the Division of Revenue Bill and the Appropriations Bill and submit them in the next coming weeks. Now, this doesn't speak to the fact that the Money Bills Act of Parliament, which governs those two bills and their processing in Parliament, are determined by the Fiscal Framework. Now, when they are reintroduced in the next few weeks, which Fiscal Framework is going to determine how they are structured as well, because the current Fiscal Framework, which was adopted in Parliament, not only contains VAT hikes, but is currently being disputed in the courts of law. And I think the third thing that we must all reflect on more meaningfully is that the Minister of Finance has said that the shortfall that is going to come as a result of the cutting of the VAT hikes is going to be offset by budget cuts or expenditure cuts, which speaks to him replacing the VAT increases with austerity measures, which will see budget cuts to health, budget cuts to education, budget cuts possibly to social grants. So this past 30-day period, because everyone who is speaking today in that press conference is speaking as if it's a victory that is a product of their agreement of 30 days to seek alternatives, doesn't include any alternative revenue generation mechanism proposals by any political party, because the Minister of Finance says that the VAT hikes are going to be offset by expenditure cuts. So it means that there's no consideration of any proposal by anyone. So those are 3 points I think are important for us to note. But fourthly, and perhaps lastly, before I hand it over back to you as well, Parliament now has 6 days to pass the amendment bill that the Minister of Finance seeks to introduce. This must have public participation. This must be processed by committees. Ultimately, it must be processed by the National Assembly. Now, for this to happen over the next 6 days would be a miracle, considering that there's a weekend in between. So we want to call for calm. We want to call for South Africans to look at the situation objectively. We are not against the scrapping of VAT hikes, but we want to ensure that this is feasible in terms of law, and that we're not told that the VAT hikes will be introduced on the 1st of May and scrapped a couple of months after, because it's not possible to implement in the next coming days.
So what you're saying, in short, to your last point, Mr. Thambo, is that there's no way that that Parliament can actually sit and go through the relevant processes in order to stop this VAT hike from going ahead on the 1st of May.
Objectively, I don't think it is possible, because we must also consider the fact that I stated earlier that if the minister is going to introduce new Division of Revenue and Appropriations bills, they must be prefaced by a fiscal framework that is adopted by the National Assembly as well. Now, you can't introduce Division of Revenue bills and appropriation bills which are not consistent with the fiscal framework. And the ones he's going to reintroduce are by default not going to be consistent with the fiscal framework, because the revenue generation mechanisms in the adopted fiscal framework rely on VAT hikes. So we're curious to see as to how is he going to revisit a process of firstly reversing the adoption of the previous fiscal framework, which is now in court, but also introducing one that will determine and guide the Division of Revenue bills and appropriation bills that he seeks to introduce as well. So these are 3 pieces of legislation that must be processed by Parliament, go through a public hearing process in the next 6 days. We're looking...
Right, Mr. Thambo, it just seemed to be having a little bit of a problem with our connection there. Mr. Thambo,
are you able to hear me?
I can hear you now.
Yes, so if the minister has envisaged, along with National Treasury, mechanisms to effectively introduce 3 pieces of financial legislation over the next 6 days, then the EFF is more than willing to form part and parcel of this solution, which will offset the VAT hikes, as long as austerity is not going to be the substitute for those VAT hikes, because frontline services can't suffer as a substitute to VAT hikes increases that we've seen. So we're hopeful, as hopeful as anyone, but we want reality to prevail. And that is why we're not going to participate in the braggadocious behavior of saying this is a result of our own work. there's a lot of legislative loopholes that need to be filled.
Yeah, the IFP, by the way, did mention the austerity measures and also registered their displeasure at that particular provision. But I want to ask you about the court case and the impact that this decision has on that, if at all.
Look, I think it would have an impact. I'm aware that the Minister of Finance's legal team has approached the legal teams of both the EFF and the Economic Freedom Fighters. I can confirm that now to you on air. And they want to reach an out-of-court settlement as it relates to the process we've undertaken to take the fiscal framework and revenue proposals out under review, because we believe that they were adopted unprocedurally. And of course, the other part B speaks to the VAT Act, which gives the minister powers to pronounce on a VAT increase unilaterally. Now, it's important to note as well that there's no legislation that allows the minister to reverse a VAT Act unilaterally. That is why he seeks to introduce an amendment bill. So we are going to be engaging with the legal team of the Minister of Finance to hear, because we haven't received those proposed out-of-court settlements yet, and that will determine the engagement moving forward as to our participation in the court process as well. But as things stand, we haven't reached resolution on that, but we are still awaiting the judgment from the court on the 29th of April.
Mr. Thambo, thanks so much for your time.